Are we good to go? All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Gnomon campus, and welcome everybody watching the live stream. I'm your host, Adam Hartel, and it is my pleasure to host this evening's event, The Artist Journey, Pathways to Creature and Character Art. And I am on the stage with four fantastic character artists slash creature artists slash everything else you've done in the industry. And I get to talk with you guys, and we're going to get into it. But before we do, I just wanted to thank our sponsor, Lenovo, as well as AMD. Both of these fantastic companies help to make evenings like this possible so we can continue to provide free content and events to those of you who are part of the arts community and want to be a part of the orbit of what is happening here at Gnomon in the industry. If you're in need of closed captioning, those of you who are watching the live stream, please head over to our Facebook live feed where you can get closed captioning through that platform. So without any further ado, I'd like to get into it. And tonight we're joined by Ashley Stegon. We also have Amy Sharpe with us. We have Colleen Larson, as well as Amanda Irani. Yeah. Ooh. And because we have such a massive amount of accumulated talent on the stage right now, I am going to forego the formal reading of the bios because I think it's so much more interesting to hear the bio from the artist. So maybe starting down at the end here with you, Ashley, could you tell us, we've already said that you're a character artist, but tell us a little bit about what you're doing and just kind of share your informal bio with us a little bit.
Sure. Hi, everyone. As you said, I'm Ashley. I currently work at Cold Iron Studios as a senior character / creature artist since Cold Iron makes Aliens Fireteam Elite, so I get to sculpt xenomorphs all day. So yeah, mainly right now I'm doing creature art, but I also came from Legacy Effects, which used to be Stan Winston Studios, where I have practical effect background along with 3D printing and wrap-up prototyping for things like The Mandalorian and Avengers films and things like that. So, yeah.
Very cool. Awesome. Amy?
Hi, I am Amy, and I'm currently working as a freelance artist at Riot Games. So I'm in the merchandising department, which is a lot of sculpting for 3D printing for statues. And most of my background has been characters for cinematics.
Awesome.
Hey guys, my name's Colleen. I am a senior character artist at Naughty Dog. I've been there for an entire month, but prior to that, I was working with Naughty Dog from PlayStation Studios Visual Arts in San Diego. So my team directly worked with Naughty Dog on The Last of Us Part 1 and Part 2.
Awesome.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Amanda Irani. I work for Santa Monica Studios currently. We worked on God of War Ragnarok, recently closed that project out, and it's been a super fun experience. Prior to that, I was working a lot of indie projects, some of which didn't lift off, some of which are still working on lifting off. And so my journey starting out, going from indie to, AAA studio was very exciting for me, and I've always specialized in characters. I started with 2D prior to transitioning to 3D, and it's been a really fun journey. I'm very excited to be here with you all, and it's so nice to have the opportunity to speak to everyone here.
And I'm really excited to get into it because each of you have fairly unique origin stories. You each have had your own unique pathway as you've navigated your way through the industry, and you've all respectively worked on amazing stuff. And to that point, on the screen, for those of you who are in the auditorium, as well as looping on the live stream, we have a collection of your guys' art. And it was just simpler to do it in this format, but I do believe we have an overlay where we can mention, who, so nobody has to guess who made what. We'll be mentioning your name along with that as the art goes up. And then you guys can see it right here on this monitor. So if you want to get distracted by each other's art, you can do that too. So the first question I'd like to kick it off with, that I like to ask all artists about their journeys, is tell us a little bit about your earliest inspirations. And that can mean anything for you. It could be at any stage in life, whether you want to go all the way back to childhood or whatever. But maybe we'll kind of go the opposite direction now. We'll start with you, Amanda. What are some of the early inspirations that you can remember that kind of began to point you on this trajectory?
absolutely everything, like anything I saw, cartoons, animation. At first I really wanted to be an animator, so a lot of the cartoons I saw, I started getting into, like asking my mom, hey, can you give me some books so I can learn how to do like frame by frame drawn animation. I started with drawing, and doing all that, and as you start to learn to draw, you're like, I should get into fine art, classic art, learn about that. So I got really inspired. I remember John William Waterhouse was one of my early wonderful, wonderful classic painter. And Alphonse Mucha was an inspiration. I mean, I still love his work. He's an absolutely fantastic artist. And I tried doing other stuff, things that maybe to make my family happy that I didn't want to do, but I always ended up going back to art. And so for me, it honestly, it really did start with cartoons, animation, and then graphic novels after that, comics, things like that. I really, really loved drawing and painting back then.
Yeah.
And then moving forward, I started playing more and more games, and I was like, this game stuff looks super cool. 3D felt more tangible for me as a possibility, and I just knew, yeah. So it's been a long journey, but yeah.
Yeah, well, and being at Santa Monica Studio, it's kind of a really cool culmination of those things because there's a little bit of everything you just talked about. In the aesthetic of the studio, stylized realism. So you've got that almost like Mucha quality, but there is that stylization that happens for games and stuff like that.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, very cool. Awesome. Colleen, what can you tell us about your origin story?
Yeah, pretty similar influences. Disney is the earliest one that I can remember. Yeah, animation, comics, yeah, Star Wars, Indiana Jones, the classics. Yeah, I actually wanted to be an animator too. I actually went to college for it, and like first semester in, I realized I'm neither good at this nor do I enjoy it. So I had to kind of pivot, So like as Amanda said, this path, is very circuitous. Lots of different interests along the way, lots of different twists and turns. But yeah, earliest memory is, Disney animation. So.
And when you saw that stuff, were you already drawing and you're like, oh, now I'm going to draw this? Or did some of that stuff like make you go, oh my gosh, I just want to draw. Like, I want to learn how to do this.
Yeah. I think it was just inspiring. I'm sure that at the time I didn't really go, okay, I'm going to draw like Disney. It was just like, it just seeped into my consciousness and kind of influenced it even from the beginning.
Cool.
But yeah.
And we're going to do this for everybody. I want to circle back. You talked about you went to school for it. I want to hear about that experience as well as we move forward. But Amy, what can you tell us about your early inspirations as an artist?
Mine was definitely video games. My mother raised me playing games on DOS and Atari. So it was a lot of Wolfenstein and Doom, and very old school games. And then as I got older, I got into theater, which is how I got into characters, I think. Which is very weird, and I wanted to be an actor. But the main thing that drew me to theater was just becoming a character, and that was it. And then I eventually kind of circled back into art. But I also drew throughout this time, so I mean, that's a given.
And if you don't mind, I want to hear just a little bit more about that. How do you feel that the time that you went after acting? You talked about acting essentially it's character design in a sense. How did acting inform what you're doing now, which is actually making characters for shows and stuff like that?
I think with acting is like you just have to understand every single aspect of a character because you are living every single day learning those lines and need to know what they're thinking and every detail about them. And when it comes with characters while working, I do try to think the same thing. I overthink characters. I do a lot of research while working, and most of that, like, I don't show that stuff, really. It's just for myself.
Is it really possible to overthink a character, though? It's just sort of like, oh, I have to move forward now because of time.
I mean, if you find yourself thinking about it while you're falling asleep.
Okay, well then I guess it is. Yeah. It's like you're like a method artist then. You just like have to become the
with
character.
With some characters, I think it's interesting to do that,
That's cool.
Yeah, just a little bit, not
too much.
Mode,
Yeah, depending on the character.
Yeah.
And then Ashley, tell us about your origins.
Yeah, mine's kind of weird. I wanted to be Steve Irwin. So, I wasn't, I mean, I played games and I liked movies, but I was super into watching Animal Planet and Nat Geo Wild. That was usually what I was watching. So some people were like, oh, have you ever seen the cartoon? I can't even think of one. Because I was like, no, I'm too busy watching Top 10 Most Extreme. So that really heavily influenced me wanting to draw animals. And I got really into, of course, if you like animals, you probably like dragons. So I was drawing lots of dragons and things when I was younger. But I also found an artist named Tara Whitlatch, which, if you guys don't know, you should. I see some thumbs up. Yes, thank you. She's an amazing character and creature artist. Her animal anatomy is beyond perfect. She does scientific illustration. And I got really into her stuff, and I realized that you could actually merge the two of loving character or loving animals and anatomy and science, but also combine that with creature design. And do something fun like for videos and video games and for film. So that wasn't until high school until those things kind of really connected. I was always drawing, but I never had really a purpose for it. I was just really obsessed with science and nature and things. So that's kind of where I started. And then slowly I got more interested in people. For a while I was like, I don't really care about character people. Like I want to do creature stuff. But over time, I was like, no, people and characters can tell really amazing stories, and then creatures can help, motivate those characters and do lots of different things. So it's a symbiotic relationship.
And because you and I have talked off camera about what you do on a daily basis, you're sort of like the Steve Irwin of xenomorphs now.
Yeah. I'm professional. Yeah, I know all the anatomy. I'm a professional Steve Irwin of xenomorphs.
Yeah, you bring in new xenomorphs to your team. Like, look at this
one. Look at this hood. Exactly. I'm like, oh, I'm all excited. So, yeah, it all translates, which is funny because a lot of that stuff, when you're younger, you don't realize that that's what makes you an artist. But I actually do think it's, everybody's origin stories are really interesting, and you should really stick to what it means to you to be a kid. Because when you're a kid, you're actually at your most creative. It's something that is actually kind of taken away in adulthood, and you can watch tons of videos about it. But kids are super creative, and I think being a kid is actually the most important part of like an artist's journey, is like keeping creative and keeping fun and finding the curiosity in anything that you do, and figuring out how to utilize that into, your art. So
I couldn't agree more. And I think that takes us perfectly into what I want to talk about next, because one of my favorite quotes I learned a long time ago is, art mirrors life, and every artist has a unique life, which produces unique art, hence the artist's journey. So let's kind of fill in that liminal space now between early inspirations and like keeping that inner child alive, but now starting to like trying to concretely prepare to be able to pursue this as a vocation. How did you know that you wanted to do this professionally? Did that happen all at once, or did it happen over a course of time? So we'll keep zigzagging. So we'll start now with you, Ashley.
Cool.
We'll just dovetail off of what you just said and tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I think mine's probably a good one to start with to begin with, because I've talked about with people that my path was very straightforward. I wanted to do creatures. I found animal, I found creature design, I found Tara Whitlatch, and I found that because of Gnomon DVDs when the Gnomon workshop was there. And I was like, Dad, I really want this Tara Whitlatch creature design thing. And he's like, what's Gnomon? And I was like, I don't know, I just want the DVD. But he's the one who did the research and was like, oh, it's a school that's like 40 minutes away. Maybe we should go check it out. And so we did. And at the time, Gnomon was not BFA. It was only a vocational, 3-year certificate program and things like that. And so I was actually, I was one of the youngest students accepted at the time into Gnomon because I came from high school. So I started Gnomon when I was 17, going on 18. I graduated just before I was like 21. So my path was super straightforward as far as me being very lucky and fortunate that I found Gnomon, and then did the 3-year modeling and texturing program with a specificity in character and creature work. And then from there, I got an internship at Legacy Effects. So my career it's kind of been unchanging. Some people were like, oh, I'm into animation, or I'm maybe into texturing, or this, that. My whole time I was like, I want dragons, and that's all I want. I just want dragons. And so, yeah, I've always pursued creatures and I've always pursued character because, again, that's just where my childhood and that's where my love for art comes from. So,
Yeah, I love that. Just send in the dragons. As long as it's dragons, I'm happy.
yep.
Keep the dragons going. Perfect.
Well, now it's xenomorphs, so
Now, yeah, they're just different kind of
I'll
dragon.
give
in a
them
sense,
wings. It'll be fine.
yeah. And I think we have some Gnomon students with us this evening. Is that the case? I believe it. Yes, I see
Oh, so
some
only a
hands.
couple people
So-
are no.
So you're in good company.
Oh, okay, cool.
All right. So Amy.
I teach here, by the way, as well.
Oh,
So-
that's right. I should have
yeah,
mentioned
I
that.
should probably mention that.
What class
like,
are you teaching right now?
I teach Intro to Digital Sculpting. So if you want to learn ZBrush, that's me. Yeah. And we can probably talk about the transition from 2D stuff to
Yes.
3D and how that translates later.
Cool.
So
Awesome. Amy, tell us a little bit how you went from early inspirations to starting to get on a track that helped you prepare for what you're doing now.
So I did an undergrad degree in Boston for graphic design, and I did not go directly into this field. It was a huge mistake, but I got my foundation skills that way. So, and then I wanted to be a character concept artist, so I thought that I wanted to do 2D. I didn't know I wanted 3D right away. So I don't know why I decided on Gnomon because it is a 3D school, but I just saw characters and I just was like, that's close enough. So I moved across the country, and I turned out that I really, really liked it, and I like 3D more than 2D. So I kind of just stuck with that, and I thought that I wanted to do characters in games. So that's what my portfolio was for. But then I realized when I graduated, I didn't really want to do characters in games. I wanted to do cinematics and high res. I kind of just been doing like a back and forth. So now I'm in printing for statues. So
Yeah. No, it just takes you where it takes you.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Very cool. And then Colleen, tell us a little bit about the kind of the next steps in the journey for you.
Sure. Yeah. Games, animation, comics. Those were like my interests as a kid. And throughout different stages of my life, I kind of pursued those different interests. As I moved into high school, I think that was where I wanted to do. My dream has always been Naughty Dog since I was a kid. But then, those things kind of like fall to the back burner for some time. And at the time in high school, I wanted to do animation, like at Pixar or whatever. And in high school, I started to, pick up like how to draw comics, learning anatomy. My junior year of high school, I attended a summer program called California State Summer School for the Arts. And it was an animation boot camp at CalArts. It was amazing. Like it was kind of like a preview for college. And met some amazing friends there, had an amazing experience. And then, that's what started making me realize, like, actually, maybe animation isn't really my thing, but I've always loved drawing, painting, and then kind of like Ashley mentioned, like, creatures being the cornerstone. Like for me, that was always characters. There was never a time as a kid, I was drawing my own characters constantly. Like that was always just my number one interest. And so San Jose State came onto my radar, and I decided shortly after my summer program that I wanted to go to San Jose State. And their program there is incredibly powerful in terms of the fundamentals of drawing, which I think we can see a common thread forming here, which is like foundational 2D skills like feed directly into 3D skills. And yeah, that's where I learned all those things. And I mean, I may have gone there for animation, and that didn't really work out. But at the same time, I turned my interest more toward concept art for games. And it really wasn't until my senior year when I was taking a requisite 3D course that 3D, I don't know, there's something about it just sparked. And I was like, I think it was when I started using ZBrush for, like intensely. And I was like, this is awesome. Like it was just this like moment where I was just like, this is what I want to do. Because, you know, designing characters is one thing, but like seeing them come off the page and come to life is just this addicting feeling where you're just like,
Absolutely.
I've brought this thing to life. Like,
Mhm.
it's alive, you know.
Yeah.
It's amazing. And I actually ended up finishing out my BFA in illustration because I was like, I've come this far. Like, I'm just gonna finish out my BFA, and yeah, that was kind of my path after childhood. Yeah.
Absolutely. I hear that aspect of your story often from artists. I've had the exact same experience, is that you go from drawing and you don't have to leave the drawing, but as soon as you pick up ZBrush, it's like, oh my gosh, like all the stuff I know about drawing can help me make
Yeah.
a real character, you know, something in 3D. It's
Well, and
super cool.
it also shows you how little you know,
Yes.
because you can't hide behind um, like you. It has to look good from every single angle,
Yeah.
and you have to actually be able to understand the structure of what you're drawing. Whereas if you find like a kind of hieroglyphic or like shorthand way of drawing certain things, and you don't fully understand the musculature, the anatomy, or the perspective, you're kind of just copy and pasting what you've already learned, what's in your mental library.
Hmm.
Whereas in 3D, it's like when I started using 3D, it just put in stark contrast how little I knew. Uh, you know, even though I thought I was good to go, it was like, no, you need to actually like go back to the drawing board and like, no pun intended, like, you know,
Haha.
go back to fundamentals and study this stuff again.
Hmm.
And I mean, the thing about being an artist, you're going to continue studying your whole life, and that's what I love about it. But yeah.
Awesome. No, I'm sure we're going to come back to that subject, I'm sure, in this conversation, because that's very, very key what you're saying. Amanda,
Yes.
tell us a little bit about going from your early inspirations to like starting to find your feet and take your first steps towards preparing for this.
Right. So I was looking at this question when you sent us kind of our preparatory materials, and I was like, I have no idea how to even approach this question because my path was so winding and I kept changing my mind over and over again. So in high school, I felt very strongly that I wanted to pursue art. And I had a very nice drawing teacher. I was 14 at this time, but for some reason she saw skill, talent, whatever. She ended up referring me to a friend of hers who was working on a series of children's books, and I started working on like doing little illustrations for that. And that meant so much to me because this is a teacher who's teaching like 6 or 7 periods a day. She has like over 100 students, and she thought of me. And that's when I started to get the feeling like maybe this is something I could do. But as I started to get a little older, getting towards the end of high school, you're thinking about my future and the pressure from your family, like not to do art because maybe art is not a thing, and me being me and trying to be nice and listening, I ended up going into a university for computer science. And I started having a lot of doubts about that decision. I got 2 or 3 years into the program, and the itch to just like, I want to draw and I want to paint. And I decided, and I wasn't doing so well in school because I was unhappy with what I was doing. So I went back to art. And then, of course, then the insecurity started piling on again. Like, I'm a little bit getting oldish now. It sounds silly now, but you feel like
It doesn't sound silly to me. We have very similar stories, actually.
I'm behind the curve. Like, I felt that I was behind the curve because you have other students who are starting when they're 17 or 18, and I'm like 3 or 4 years in now, and I felt behind. So I again tried to push into doing like art, like as a minor. So I couldn't remember the word for a second. A minor at university. Unfortunately, like my grades had gotten to a point like our fine art program, which is what I wanted to go into, was impacted. So in order to get in there, you had to have a very high GPA. And I wasn't there. So I said, okay, I'm going to go to community college. I'm going to study fine art. I'm going to get my grades up. And as I was doing it, I started to find like having a hard time finishing my pieces, I think just due to general insecurity. So I swung back to computers. I started doing networking. I studied to be a Cisco networking, whatever it was back then. and then I was like, oh my God, I can't do this. So I swung back to art, studied classically. I attended an atelier here in Southern California called Watts
Oh
Atelier
yeah,
de
yeah.
Arts. Fantastic school. I went there for 2 to 3 years. They kind of gave me a really great structure, how to start training myself. What I found, like I started to feel like I was getting my footing in drawing and painting with their assistants. What I found was like I was in this cycle of like I kept sketching. I couldn't finish anything, but I could sketch like a crazy person. So I said to myself one day, I was getting like at this point I think I was like 28. So I started 3D very old. Well, I don't want to say very old because I know that 28 doesn't sound very old, maybe to some, but for me, I felt like this is like super late in my life. But I was like, maybe I should pick up 3D to supplement the 2D. And as soon as I started doing 3D, it clicked, like I could finish my stuff. And that was the moment that I realized this is what I have to do. And I just started hustling and just 10, 12-hour days, just pushing and pushing and pushing, personal work, teaching myself, I got to get this going. I can finally finish stuff. I'm doing pretty okay. And things just started falling into place from there. And that's kind of, I feel like it's very important that people hear the message that it's okay to be lost. You don't have to have a story that's everything started perfect. I definitely didn't have that, and I definitely have a lot of respect for people who power through the tough times of confusion and all that good stuff. But that was the moment I remember just finishing that first 3D character and being like, I can actually do this, and this feels good. So
Yeah, and thank you, by the way, for saying that, because I think that what you're talking about is a massive encouragement to so many artists out there.
oh yeah.
Because I think, regardless of what path we've taken, I've talked to every artist I've talked to anyway, has that time where they're just like, I'm lost in the woods. I have no idea if this is even possible for me. But there was a quote that I heard recently. I forget who it was. It was somebody on Instagram, a professional artist, and they just said the only difference between an amateur and a professional is an amateur who put in the reps.
Yeah.
And you talked about that. Just I have to do this.
Yeah.
And you do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, that's exactly what I want. Kind of the next thing I wanted to talk about, and I just want to throw this out there to let anybody in any order grab this question, and that is, in this phase of life that we're talking about, maybe you haven't fully landed your first professional job yet. You're sort of tenaciously putting in the reps, whether that's through formalized education or on your own. What can you tell us about some of the real challenges that you've faced? I mean, you leaned into that a little bit already, but what are the things that you uniquely personally found that you had to overcome, or knew that it would be a formidable opponent of yours through your whole career that you had to learn how to deal with and work with?
Right. I would say, other than the insecurities, which
Sure.
I touched on, and I think that's pretty apparent that that's going to happen. Not allowing other people to dictate your decisions, because I was letting other voices guide me and put doubts in my mind, because there would be like comments like, well, it's not really lining up for you, maybe you shouldn't do that. And when that happens, it really kills your flow, and it can really kill your creativity, because every time you sit down to work on your stuff, the doubts start flooding in. And I think it's so important, like, you know you better than anybody else. You know your vision and you know what you like. Also, and this is also important in terms of the type of art that you want to pursue and the type of art that you want to make as well, because some people might try to talk you out, or you might feel pressure to do a different style or to pursue something like this or something like that, just based on feedback that you're receiving. Like, to me, it's so important. Know yourself and trust yourself. I wish I had trusted myself a little more when I was younger. All the signs were pointing in the direction that art was for me. I mean, that teacher who saw me when I was 14,
Yep.
she believed. I had multiple teachers who did stuff like that for me through the process. And even like at some point in college, I was doing a graphic design class, and this was in San Diego. The teacher there, she was like, I'm friends with I think it was either like someone pretty high up in Sony.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like 22 at the time, and she was like, hey, would you like me to try to get you an interview? And I chickened out. And then I had to live with that decision 5-6 years later. Like, did I lose the opportunity of a lifetime to work at Sony by turning down this woman's offer? Like, and I kind of allowed other people to tell me, you're not ready for that. You're going to lose that job.
Okay.
You might not be able to hold that job. And then that fed into my own insecurities. So long story short, trust yourself. And when you know what you want to do, go for it. Trust me, living in regret is not. I've been there. Thankfully, I managed to swing back to Sony.
Yeah.
I don't know how. I guess I got lucky in that regard, but
Yeah.
that might not happen all the time. So just trust yourself, go with your gut. If you love something, don't ever let anybody tell you that that's not for you.
I
Because
cannot agree more. Like, I think that is the tenet that I've kind of lived by. Basically, my whole life, it's just trust yourself. You know what you love to do, and maybe you don't know what it is yet. Experiment, try stuff, and I mean, a school like this is great, or state school, where you get to try everything. But it's just, you, like you said, you know yourself better than anyone else, and don't put anything in your portfolio. Don't spend time on anything that you don't want to do for a 8 hours a day or more.
Yeah, I think that.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Go for it.
No, I was just going to hit on that point because I think it's super important that I think most amateur artists or students will look at professional art and say, okay, I need to hit that bar, or I need to do this. And while, yes, if you want to work for something like Riot doesn't make super realistic looking games, right? So there is a style that goes to each studio, but it is really important to not get jaded or confused or feel like you have to be a certain way in order to be an artist in this industry, because we just made the point that your voice is the thing that will make you a valuable artist. It's your eye, it's all those things. It's not a Rob Bliss copy, as much as we all love Rob Bliss or something like that. You can't be the copy of him. He's already good at what he does. So it's important for you to stay true to yourself and do what you can find that you can do best, that you have to offer for the industry. And especially now, because it's so prevalent with, I mean, look at all the art that you can constantly see all the time that's shoved in your face. Instagram will constantly make you feel like, oh, I'm not doing enough mechs. Like at the time I was a Noman, really high-end, cool-looking space, Star Citizen looking mechs was like really popular on ArtStation, because of Mike Nash or whatever it might be, whatever the trend is. But don't fall for the trend. They're trends, so they'll eventually go away anyway. So you just got to, this is a career that you're supposed to be doing for 30 plus years. So the biggest thing with that is like, don't get swayed by what you see as getting likes on social media or anything like that. Just stay true to your stories and stay true to what you like to do.
Yeah.
And the industry will find a place for you if you're valuable in that. So
Yeah, you don't have to chase the likes.
No.
Some people that rely on social media for their income might need to do that, but in order to get into a studio, like, just be yourself. Make
those are
projects that you enjoy doing.
two very different jobs. Being a professional content creator on social media, which there are people that are really good at that, that's their love.
Yeah.
But creating art for the entertainment industry to be used by a studio for projects that are being done, it's a very different thing. And I didn't mean to interrupt you because I want to hear more about that. I think that for a lot of artists out there who are trying to figure out, what do I need to do? Where do I need to go? Just like Ashley said, what we get fed is social media. And social media is great and it's fine. But it's not showing us all the stuff that artist made that they weren't willing to post.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm hoping actually that I interrupted you midstream, because I'm hoping you have more to say about what you just started unpacking there, about if it's not about making art for the likes. What did you personally find that it was about? Where did you find your motivation that kept you going?
It's just expressing what you want to express. It's showing the subject matter that you want to exhibit in your art. Basically, just sharing your interests and your influences with others. And even if no one, I mean, ideally you would be sharing your work, because that's a big step in making yourself visible to studios. But you should be making work with the intention of, or with the mindset of never showing it. You know, you're making it just for yourself. And like Ashley mentioned earlier, maintaining that childlike sense of wonder, that childlike sense of, you know, why did you draw when you were a kid? Just because it was fun, because you enjoyed doing it. And I think that's how we should try to make art for ourselves, at least in my opinion. If you want to make art of the stuff that's popular now, go for it. But I don't think anyone should ever feel pressured to do that if they don't want to do that.
Yeah. And it's funny because it is this collective pressure that everybody feels, but I don't find that there's a massive amount of people that are actually saying that that's what they're wanting people to do. I think we just sort of project success on other people and think, well, they must have done this to be successful, so maybe I need to copy that.
Right.
Which leads back to, I think, what you were talking about, Amanda, which is that self-effacing kind of like, I need to find my own confidence, not try to piggyback on someone else's.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and sometimes that could also mean shutting off social media for a little while. I wasn't very active. I mean, I posted on ArtStation when I would complete a piece, but I wasn't using social media really at all. And I think that actually helped me stay with me, not with all the other stuff that's being beamed into your eyeballs through your phone on social media. I mean,
100%.
I love seeing what people make. I absolutely love it, but it can project a sensation into your mind, perhaps, that you need to be even more prolific than you're capable of.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to be kind and gentle to yourself. Some people are very prolific and fast. Some people are more like the tortoise and the hare type of a individual, where they can push really hard on a long project and do an absolutely fantastic job. And there's a place for everybody in the world, regardless of like work ethic, work style. And I think being very active on social media and then comparing yourself to other artists, that's another really big problem. It's hard.
Very hard.
It's a balance you have to strike, because you have to go, okay, what is this quality bar that I'm trying to hit in order for a studio that I'm interested in to, to pay attention to my work. But at the same time, we can't let it paralyze us, which is so easily what it can do. So it's very hard to strike that balance, I feel, especially for students.
That's actually why I love having these kinds of conversations so much, is we tend to take successful artists such as yourselves, or accomplished artists. I know that success sometimes can be like, well, what's success? But accomplished artists such as yourselves, and we can kind of objectify that and just assume that now you're touched by the gods and you walk 10 feet off the ground and everything comes easily for you.
I mean,
and it's
obviously.
amazing. But really, I think social media is great. I have an Instagram account. I love using it, but social media is not equipped to share the kind of stories that you guys are sharing, because it takes more time. It takes getting to know the artist. So let's turn a corner just a little bit, and I want to hear about one of your first experiences of like, oh, I have a professional gig now, whether that was a freelancing project or the doors to a studio flung open or whatever it was. And I'll qualify it by saying, pick the one that you want to pick. It doesn't have to be the very, very first. Pick an experience of getting a job in the early days that you feel was a real important moment for you. I think, yeah, let's keep going in order. So I'll start now with you, Amanda, and we'll go down the line.
There was a studio that I worked for, a small studio, and we started off revenue share actually. So when I joined the team, we weren't even getting paid. But after a while, we started pushing some work and we got funding through the work that we started pushing. And that's when I started to feel like something's happening here. And then for the preceding like year and a half, we were getting paid for the work that we were doing. And that felt very good, kind of just because I was in a stable place, that I was just doing some work for them. And I think that was the moment when I was like, this is a possibility for me. That was also a really interesting experience because I was the first character. We had a creature artist there, but I was the first character artist. And I still relatively new to the craft as well. So I was kind of in this strange position where it almost felt like a leadership-ish position. I wasn't a lead or something like that, but I had to make a lot of decisions for our pipeline and things, and I had to work with our tech artists.
Mm-hmm.
I had to work with our rigger a lot. There was a lot of back and forth conversations. How do you prefer your topology? Would you like me to do it like this or like that? And then for tech, how do you want me to bring these into engine? How do you want me to set up the materials? Do we want to instance these? Are we using triplanar materials? And all this sort of stuff. And I learned so much from that experience, working directly with a tech artist, working directly with a rigging artist. Like, there's just a wealth of knowledge that I attained, and I gained pretty decent proficiency with Unreal Engine because of that tech artist that I worked with. Because when I started, I'm like, I don't know how to use Unreal. He's like, don't worry, I will guide you through it. And I loved that experience.
Yeah. What I love about your story, Amanda, is the circuitousness of the path.
Mm-hmm.
And as someone who's been on a lot of different career paths myself, I think there's that moment that can happen, and I think it happens for every artist to a certain degree, where it's like, I thought the job was going to be this, but now I'm doing this. But if you learn to embrace that thing and let it become a superpower, it just makes you better at doing the other thing too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
We were talking about how art emulates life, and you mentioned like how, I think somebody, it was either you or somebody else, talking about how like you pick up skills that you have no idea are going to benefit you. Like at some point, during high school, my last year, I ended up doing theater costume design, and we were sewing costumes by hand. I was like, I'm never going to use this skill, but whatever. And then next thing you know, I'm like, oh, I'm in Marvelous Designer. This is just like sewing, and it benefited me so much. Yeah.
That's awesome.
So
Colleen.
Yeah, actually, speaking of going into the interview and then the job being different, I was fortunate enough that in my senior year, pursuing my BFA in illustration, one of our alumni, Colin Fix, reached out to our professors, put the call out for submissions for us to apply for an internship. And I thought that the position was like a 2D character design job, but literally in the middle of the interview, they go, this is actually a 3D art position, with the ability, with the possibility of doing 2D designs as well. And I was like, I got to be honest with you guys, like, I don't really know much about game art. I had maybe like 2 ZBrush sculpts in my portfolio at the time. And they go, that's okay, we'll teach you. And they did. It's an incredibly unique situation, and I will be forever grateful to that team. And like within several months, like, the three of us that got hired as interns, we were game artists, and I was a character specific artist, learning from Omar San Cristobal, who's now at Pixar. And it was just the most amazing crash course I could ever have asked for. And speaking of situations where you don't you don't know what you're going to get when you come in. It's like I had just started to see 3D as a future, and essentially they solidified that for me. And like Amanda was talking about, this person that took her under his wing, like, you know, sometimes that's the keystone for laying the groundwork for this new career for yourself. And you know, as we go from intern to, you know, and now we are up here on the stage, it's like the intention is for us to hopefully play some type of role in being that for someone else.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's the cool thing is, you know, especially as in my preparation phase, I was reaching out to artists that I knew, or even artists that I didn't know, just saying, "Hey, I've got a really concise question that hopefully doesn't take too long for you to answer," which is the best kind of question to ask. It's almost like the more professional the artist is, the more generous they are to just stop and go, "Oh, yeah, absolutely, I'll talk to you." I have to believe, though, that in that job, they took a look at your proficiency and your foundational skills and your drawing and all of that.
100%.
And they were like, "Oh, we can teach you the ZBrush part, but we know that you can make characters and stuff."
Yeah, that's actually something I wrote in my notes for today is, you know, you can learn all the technical aspect of game art or whatever field you want to go into, but teaching the artistic fundamentals, teaching, you know, the aspect of taste, like the aspect of like specificity, like those things are much more difficult to teach, and they take way longer, you know. And it's like establishing those fundamentals early on is absolutely crucial. And you know, when people reach out to me for advice, like that's always what I go back to is, you know, fundamentals. And those are the groundwork that you must build everything else on top of, because if those things are shaky, like it's just going to be, it's going to fall, it's going to crumble to the ground.
Mm-hmm.
And the people that are in the studios that you know you want to work for, like they're going to be able to see that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amy, is there an early opportunity that you want to share with us about?
Kind of, yeah. So my first couple of years of working were sort of weird types of tasks, like a lot of hard surface, and there was some character work in between. But it was nothing that was like exactly what I wanted until I ended up at PsyOp. It was about 2 years in. And then that's when I started to get like glimpses of game cinematics as jobs, and they didn't have a pipeline built for like characters, like a full phone pipeline, but it was like the basics. And I remember that there was a League of Legends cinematic that came in, and I was so incredibly excited to have the honors of making a weapon. And that was like my thing. And I knew from that point on, like I was going to chase any project that was like League of Legends cinematic.
Awesome.
And I worked there for a while more after that. And like I got a lot of skills like doing other types of modeling. And all of that ended up contributing to when I got to Blur, basically. So I did need all of the other types of tasks with it. But I do remember that one moment, though.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, I mean, League of Legends, that's one of those IPs that so many people aspire.
What is this?
We'll talk about it later. It's okay. I'm pretty sure it's dragons in it, so you'll be interested. Ashley, I know you mentioned that first door that opened up at Legacy. You can tell us about that, or if you want to pick a different opportunity.
I'll tell you about that.
Okay.
Yeah,
all
for
right.
sure. No, I want to talk about Legacy as a whole because I think it's really interesting. I came to Gnomon, which is a very technical school. You'll learn all the programs, and you'll remember all of them, and you'll continue learning programs for the rest of your life if you come to Gnomon. So I came into Legacy being very much a kind of almost like a technical artist, but everyone at Legacy, you know, built my childhood. They all built, the original Aliens Queen. They did the Predator. They did Terminator. They did all this stuff practically, which means they sculpted it in clay, and they would paint it by hand and do all that stuff. And so what's actually really interesting is I have a lot to thank there because I got 30 years of experience behind me because I worked with people that built kind of what 3D tries to mimic, where it came from. It's like it's like going to the origin source of why do we texture human skin the way we do. I still texture human skin or creature skin the way that they showed me at Legacy, how they do it on actual silicone, right? So I think it really teaches you that you can learn from anybody and anywhere, and it doesn't matter if they don't know the same thing. I think a lot of people are like, I know ZBrush, and everyone's like, cool story, bro. That's nice. I know how to sculpt in clay, and that's very, very different. And I think you can absolutely learn from both, because for example, one of my coworkers at Legacy, he knew basic ZBrush core. We were like, okay, here's like how you move, here's how you do some sculpting, and he would kick our asses at sculpting because he had 40 years of sculpting in clay. Like, the guy was insane, and he was like, I just use the one tool, like he doesn't use, he just does everything by hand.
That's the round brush artist in Photoshop.
Yeah.
I just use the round brush.
I just use I was like, I'll just use the standard brush, and he's like, that's all I know. But he taught me how you hand sculpt skin and like the things to think about, and it's all about, nothing in practical effects comes for free. It's all about learning those fundamentals and understanding those fundamentals at its core level and being really creative with it. You have to put a person in a suit, or you have to hide a lot of things or whatever it may be because it needs to get done in 3 weeks. We did 250 commercials a year, which is almost as many days as there are in a year. So we were always on deadlines, and I learned so much from those people, and I think it's really important to and what was also really nice is they wanted to learn from me too. They weren't like, oh, we don't want to know this computer stuff. They were like, ooh, what's rigging? And I rigged a bunch of stuff for Sideshow, and that was one of the things that I was really good at doing was, for the Alien Queen maquette or for the Mythos maquette, or we did the Iron Man maquette, I would rig them all. And then we would do a bunch of different poses because they didn't have anybody that was able to actually do that and like send options to Sideshow, and they loved it. So it was awesome to be able to, you give and you get. And I think that's a really important relationship to remember is no matter how long you're in this industry, I could probably learn from people in the audience now. Like, it doesn't matter. So, lowering that ego a bit is really important.
Yeah, no rules, just tools, right? It's just tools, and everybody
ZBrush
uses
is just a
differently.
glorified pen. So at the end of the day, It doesn't, it's just got a lot of buttons in it.
It's funny you talk about the rigging because I remember there's that great show on, I think, Netflix, The Movies That Made Us, and I watched the section about aliens and how they did the Alien Queen, and they're like, they just threw a bunch of trash bags on top of like an armature, and we're like,
the traditional,
and it's
trash
like, that's
bag
rigging,
test.
that's rigging right there. That's popsicle sticks and movement.
And we still call it that even in industry standard. Like, I'll call things a trash bag test, or at Legacy we call them trash bag tests. Even though it was the first one, we don't use it out of trash bags anymore. We do like rapid. It's a little fancier than trash bags, but we always call it the garbage bag or the trash bag test.
It's like the trash bag's like the analog of like the dirty UV unwrap. Like just quickly, just unwrap
it.
Get it
out. Yeah.
All right. So in a few minutes, we're going to transition to taking some questions. I think from the chat on the streams as well as our live audience here at Gnomon. The kind of last thing I wanted to kick off with you guys, though, and I was thinking about, because talking about what you're doing now, we could easily spend the next hour talking about your present job. And I also know that probably a lot of the questions we're going to get are going to have to do with things that you're working on presently or have worked on. So we'll get to that as well. What I wanted to ask you was, I think along the same lines as like what we were unpacking with social media, like the thing that everybody thinks they know about art, the thing that or is being told to them, or that they think they know about working in the industry, or what having the job is actually like. What would you like to tell us about the job, as it were, from a standpoint of like your own unique experience? Maybe whether that's an anecdote or a fun experience you had or a challenge you faced, anything that might help to humanize it a little bit more. And I'd like to hear from every person, but rather than doing it like stepped in order, I'll let whoever wants to jump on that question first go for it.
You can just zigzag that. I'll just go ahead
Okay.
and start. I shouldn't have started. I don't know what to say. No, I'm kidding. No, I think the biggest thing that you'll learn in the industry is like just because I think this is important. Again, it comes with like artists' egos are extremely fragile most of the time. Being told something doesn't look right or being criticized, you have to get over that immediately. You have to be able to want to show your work and be okay with getting feedback. And a lot of it, I worked with Tim Burton once doing a show in Vegas. We printed all of his sketches. He would sketch stuff out, and then we had to like try to realize it in 3D. You want to talk about a hard through to do realize in 3D is Tim Burton's drawings. They're really crazy. But it was one of those things where he would sit there and he'd be like, no, it's all wrong. And then he'd sit and he'd draw on top of your 3D and he'd like try to figure stuff out. And you have to remember, it's not that you're a bad artist. He just has a vision that you have to try to find and match. And if you don't get it the first time, it's okay. That's not what it's about. It's not about getting it the first time. Anybody here will probably tell you that the first iterations of a game or a movie or whatever it is won't make it to the end of the film. Just look at the original Predator, right? That Van Damme was in. It's hideous and it was not Predator. Yeah. It probably never would have launched, right? And I think that's really important is that you're not a bad artist. It's just about finding the vision that you're working with. That can be the challenge most of the time with working with people, because you'll work, especially in film. When I was at Legacy, you go from Tim Burton till Del Toro to Jon Favreau to Dave Filoni to James Cameron, and they're all very different and they all have very different visions. And I think it's a really important skill to be able to see what that is and try to replicate that for them, because that's what you're valuable for. So
well, yeah, and criticism or critique often can be an awesome like power up, right? Like for what you're doing.
If you take it in correctly and you're not listening to just a social media person being like, I don't like the color purple, you're like, well, that's not really criticism, right? But if you're learning from someone who's giving you actual good feedback, it's important to absorb that and say, okay, I did it not quite right this time, but how can I make it better? It's about how can you improve and see it as an opportunity to improve, not as I suck as an artist,
Totally.
So
I'd love to like bounce off of that. It's like you can't be precious with what you're doing. You are one of a giant team. You are a person, an artist, executing within your niche, whatever that may be, and you are one piece of a giant puzzle, and you can't be precious with what you're working on. You can't just do things the hardest, longest way because that's the most artistic way. Sometimes you have to reuse stuff. Sometimes you have to kit bash. Sometimes you have to do things in a way that you might not do on your own. And this is a production. You have to get stuff done within a deadline, and you can't. Sometimes you have to make decisions quickly. A lot of times you have to make decisions quickly. You can't just spend an infinite amount of time like you might on your personal work. There is a timeline for things, and again, you just cannot be precious. Of course, you want to put your love and care into what you're doing, but at a certain point, like Ashley said, it's not about you. Like this is something bigger than you.
The perfect quote for that is, "Art is never done; it's only due."
Absolutely,
that's it.
Well, and with what you were saying, Colleen, do you? Because I would think that it's because what I'm hearing is it's not about just caring for your role, finding the care for what you are contributing, but finding the care for the team and for the project. Is there something that you can tell us that you've learned to do that helps you elevate that care to be like, oh, I will be motivated by actually caring for what we're all doing here together, as opposed to just my stake in it.
I think it's knowing that you're going to be handing your work off to another team. Keeping your files organized, working with the subsequent departments, or even just like working with the previous departments, working with concept or working with rigging in my case, being easy to work with, where it's like rigging will come back with something where it's like, oh, we need you to change this, because of rigging. And sometimes it's extensive. You can't throw a tantrum. You can't be like, I don't want to do that. It's just like, again, it's not about you. It's like, this is for the good of this game that hopefully many, many people will enjoy because of your efforts. Yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
No, it does. And I was just talking with my director yesterday, and he was making the point of the ability to pivot actually is a way of showing empathy to your director or to whoever's providing your direction.
Yeah.
Amy or Amanda, is there anything that either of you want to tell us about?
What I was kind of thinking about as the question was being answered, I was actually surprised by how human and organic the process is, and being in production, like what that means. Because I think production for a lot of people, it can have this sort of almost ominous tone to it, like production. And it's like this, like a little bit maybe scary, or you feel like you might be there just doing your thing, but it's very strongly a team effort. Like what Colleen was saying, it's you're not just thinking about you, you're not even just thinking about your team. It's like every single team is running a race, and you guys are all running together in parallel to each other. And the process is super interesting in that, as your team stuff is changing, other team stuff, because the game is coming to life organically, like right in front of you. And changes can happen randomly. Like maybe you thought something was looking great, perhaps a lighting change happened like down the line, and then seeing that piece again and realizing, oh, we might have to retouch this to work for the lighting. And there's a lot of back and forth with that, with rigging, to make sure like maybe something's not working for whatever reason, and rigging might get in touch with you and say, we need some updates to this, or you might be like, we're changing a couple of things, so you might have to reach out to rigging and be like, you guys might need to help us update this. Or there's a lot of, especially for character art, tech and rigging are going to be the two kind of departments that you're talking to a lot, and it's very important to have good relationship with those people. Those are the people who are there to help you. Especially technical artists, they love to problem solve. They're like the eternal helpers of a project, and I love working with tech artists. And sometimes I think there can be a little bit of apprehension towards working, like having to work site and having to make changes, to accommodate, because sometimes the changes can be a little tough or for whatever reason. But I think the easier you are to work with, the more accommodating you are, you're just going to be so much better off, and the team will be better off, because bad attitude can sour the experience very quickly.
Can I throw something in real quick? My lead at PlayStation Visual Arts, Darcy Korch, just something he said. He has a lot of great things that he says, but one thing that stuck with me was empathy is my superpower. And it's like, if you use that as a guiding light for any interaction you have with any other teammates, even if the situation is tense and you might be pretty pissed off at what you have to do, just like think back to that. It's like, how would this person feel receiving this message? It's like, maybe you should rewrite this message. Maybe you should, especially over text, working remotely makes it a little bit more difficult to be diplomatic, or like come across. It's easier to come across as a little bit rude. So it's kind of like being very careful about how you deliver the way you're communicating to the people. And I think I think communication within a team is a skill set in and of itself. And it's something that can't really be taught. It's something that just kind of occurs naturally when you are in an environment that is working on a production.
Would you find that sometimes artists neglect that as an artistic skill? Like we kind of forget, like, oh yeah, communication is going to be just as important as, I don't know, the ability to read topology.
Soft skills are there for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it's the same mantra of like, it's not just you. You have to communicate with everyone around you, and it's sometimes it's not easy to learn how to do that. Sometimes you have to learn how to communicate with every single person on your team, because some people may communicate in different ways, and that definitely presents some challenges earlier in your career, or if you're like coming onto a new team. It's definitely challenging sometimes.
Yeah. Amy, what could you tell us about kind of the realism of doing the job, as it were?
Yeah, there was something I was thinking about discussing ego in the workplace and how you approach tasks. There's a transition when you're a student and your work is mostly for the purpose of getting a job, but also for you. Like you're kind of trying to strike a balance between the two. And you end up losing that once you're working, and you get kind of burnt out because you're working like very long hours and you just had this huge jump. And I've noticed with character artists specifically, they are extremely over attached to their work. And I think every single, like the best character artists that I've worked with, and like I've done this a lot as well, is like you end up putting too much of your emotions into your work. And it's not even in the sense of thinking that like it's great because you're making it, like not that kind of ego, but being unable to separate, being able to detach emotionally, basically, and constantly remind yourself that this is a product and it is for the company and it is for the fans. And you have to learn how far you can push and put all of your energy into it, and then where to draw the line. And I think that kind of goes hand in hand with being burnt out and not putting enough work into your personal art, which is something like you lose it once you're not a student for a while. But you have to build that habit again where try at the end of the day or on weekends to just do small things, because that's how you get rid of that frustration, sort of like creative frustration. Because you don't have complete total control, or you want something to be the best it can possibly be. You just need to redirect it, and it takes effort. And I think it's something that you have to build a habit.
Yeah, thank you for unpacking that too. It's something I wish that we had another hour to talk about as a singular subject, is sustainability as an artist. But I think you gave us an awesome like introduction to that concept, because I think I've caught myself on jobs where you try to get all of your fulfillment from the job, and it's just not possible. It's unfair, I think, to everyone around you to need it to be the be all end all. But I love that your recommendation of continuing with your personal work, investing in yourself. Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
Learning does not end when you graduate. It only begins.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
The difference is that you can take classes that you actually really want to take. You can, you're like, I don't have to take anything I don't want to take. Like, you can pour everything into that. And I completely agree. Like, even as a professional, personal work is absolutely crucial for furthering your skills, and also, having full control over what you want to do, expressing yourself in a way that you want to, and like removing any kind of restrictions on yourself as you wish. Because a lot of times, obviously, in whatever field you're in, you're working under some kind of restriction, whether it be, you know, uh, traditional media or game art. Like, no matter what medium you're working in, I'm sure even cinematics, you have restrictions on you that with personal work, you can just lift those and study what you want to study. And I think that's not only after you've graduated, but before you've graduated, those are the ways that you can really push yourself and solidify those things that you're learning in school.
Absolutely. No, thank you. As we get ready to pivot to taking some questions right now, this is meant to be just a short answer, just like a popcorn answer from each of you. Was that like the popcorn sound that just happened?
That was really good.
So in doing personal work for each of you, and I'm not going to put you on the spot and say, are you doing personal work right now? But I just wanted to ask, what's one of the things that comes to mind that is something that you love to make, or sort of a go-to thing, like your comfort subject, that when you want to make something for yourself? Do any of you guys have something like that you find yourselves going back to? Dinosaurs, okay.
Is that popcorn enough answer?
Absolutely.
No, but honestly, because a lot of my stuff is 3D for my work, I do you see, so all the 2D work that you see, that's just me drawing, like, and that's what I kind of keep to myself. Not that I don't want to do that professionally, maybe someday, but there's a part of me that kind of likes keeping it personal and likes keeping that what I do in my off hours, because it feels so different from what I do daily. And so, I think something in contrast to what you do normally is important, but also just dinosaurs. So
That's awesome. Amy, anything for you?
Yeah, I just like to design my own characters and make their own stories. And I think it kind of fills that hole of like, there's something you want to see in media or in a story or something, and you're not seeing it. So that's usually where I go.
Yeah, make art, you'll never be bored, right? I mean, you can always come up with something new. Colleen?
It's not the most fancy answer, but I love doing fan art.
Oh, heck yeah.
Yeah. It's always been a pleasure to take something that exists and then redesign it in your own sensibility. And the greatest challenge, I think, is to like bring book characters to life, because that thing doesn't exist, but it exists in your brain, but in the very like nebulous way.
Yes.
But then you have to like nail down to the design in the ZBrush window, and you're like, I don't know how to do this. So it's like, it's a big challenge. But fan art is awesome, and as long as you're putting your own spin on it, nothing wrong with it, in my opinion.
Heck yeah.
So I will tend to have a big personal project going usually, and then my comfort zone stuff that I fall back on sometimes if I get stuck on that project or I'm having a rough day or whatever, I go back to anatomy study. And I think that's goes back to my training at the atelier, because I love that stuff so much, and also loving fine art so much. Doing studies was always, I would always see these in books that my mom would get me, like even in a nice book that my mom got me of John William Waterhouse, it would show his completed paintings, but you would see on the side, like, while he's working on these paintings that take years, sometimes he's doing these little sketches of someone's head, he's doing this little sketch of a body, he's doing anatomy practice. And so when I'm working on a project, if I'm utterly stuck, like, usually I try to bounce around on my projects. So like I get stuck on the face, I'll work on the clothes. I get stuck on the clothes, I'll work on a boot. I get stuck on the boot, I'll work on a piece of armor or a buckle or something, right? But then if I'm absolutely stuck and just don't feel like touching that personal work, I'll just go straight to anatomy study. And that's my comfort. Like I love that. And it benefits you in every aspect. You can do, like for me, sometimes I'll do quick studies where it's like 3 to 6 hours. I consider that quick. I'm not a super speedy, like 30-minute and I'm done study of a head, right?
Well, and I think a lot of the people on social media say just a quick painting. Like, how quick was it really?
The speed painting era.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Like just giving myself enough time to get into the anatomy enough, and then maybe set it aside and start another one. And I find that these forms that you'll see in life, they're so universal. Like they translate to everything that you do. It'll help you in your job, it'll help you in your personal work, and it'll help you just feel the shapes in life, or it'll help you see the shapes in life better, so that all of that can trickle down into everything that you do, and you'll just be a stronger artist, in my opinion, just from doing a little bit of study here and there.
You're helping me to realize that I need to do more of that. I need to love it as much as you do. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, I think. Sorry, you asked for quick answers, but you're
It's
not going
okay.
to get it. Like, it's important to pay attention to what artists are doing today. It's important to see what the bar is in terms of quality, especially at studios that people want to work at. But I think it's also really important to pay attention to classical artists. Like, super important. Go to a museum, look at some art. Ideally, go to Rome, look at some amazing art that'll just change your life. But I think it's important to just pay attention to not only what's happening now, but everything that's come before.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think transition to questions. My colleague Chris, are we going to jump into some of the? You're going to kind of guide us through this now, right?
Check.
Sweet.
Yeah. Yes. But just before we get into questions, I just want to let y'all know that we got some comments from the interwebs, as all the cool kids are calling it nowadays. Somebody said that Amanda is making my heart feel good. And I thought that that was really touching and very nice. I also wanted to share this one that said, thank you so much for sharing all your background and foundational stories. I see a bit of myself and my daughter in all of these stories. So they're not here, but I wanted to make sure that they're heard. But if you are here, go ahead and put your hand up if you have a question. Oh, right here. I got one going on right now.
Thank you. I love the Gnomon cube. It's awesome.
Yeah. No cube.
It's the no cube.
No cube.
I just want to say thank you all for coming out and for telling your stories. But Amanda, like your story definitely hit close to home. Like, because I've been there, just that feeling of being lost. Even to this day, right now, like I'm at that point where, like, just those feelings of self-doubt, and I'm just thinking, am I really cut out for this? Is this something meant for me? But just coming to this event and just hearing your story, just definitely, I just thought, yeah, it's not too late. So I just want to say thank you for giving me that sense of security and just letting me know that it's not too late. So thanks, Amanda.
Yeah, it's never too late.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I thought you were gonna.
Oh no, I'm just saying it's never too late. Just to go do it. Yeah, go do it.
Part of the reason I was so eager to be here is I feel like it's so important for people to hear. Like, I didn't touch 3D until I was 28, and that felt so old. I felt like I'm such a loser. Like, that was like how I felt about myself. And thankfully, I had a very good support group in terms of like friends who were supportive. Always, if you find that person in your life who is always encouraging you, don't lose that person. That person is so important. And if people are saying stuff to you and trying to talk you out of it, and you know in your heart that it's for you, forget about them. That's all I gotta say.
Hi, my name's Thomas. Nice to meet you. Thank you for coming out. I really liked hearing about your stories. This is just a question based on like the concepting phase of like, because I hear you guys like creatures and characters. How do you guys like go about it usually? Like, because I really like creatures and I want to see how other people like get their ideas.
You really like creatures, eh?
Dragons. Dragons
Came
are
to
cool.
the right place, sir. So one of the things that I was actually going to hit up on before we did the Q&A was one of the things that I also do in my free time was when I was at Noman, I used to go to the Natural History Museum every week, and I would go to the zoo every week, and I would go and draw actual animals, go draw actual bones that actually existed and actually move and function and have purpose and points in life, and take huge inspiration from that and what goes around you. And yeah, looking at people like Tara Whitlatch will totally change your world with, when it comes to design. But a lot of design also not just following anatomical function, but it's also about game function and purpose as well. Or film or whatever it is, if you're doing a horror or if you're doing something goofy, Suicide Squad had the starfish people on their faces, which is a very different type of design than what Aliens is. We've worked on both. So it's really more about fitting the story and fitting the criteria of, what what kind of box are you designing in? You know, can it be a creature that kind of doesn't make any sense, or does it need to be anatomically correct? And being able to know the fundamentals of anatomy allows you to be able to break it and push it in ways that you maybe couldn't before if you don't study enough of what's actually out there and what exists. So I think it's always good to start with the foundations of what could be possible and then pushing it farther and farther and farther to get something more interesting.
Also, reference. Just gather reference. Just go crazy. Create like the biggest pure ref file you've ever made in your life. Because like I feel like so many young artists, they're like, I can't use reference. That's cheating. That's how you build your visual library. That's how you build your mental library. You know?
Yeah. If you see any Instagram that's like #no-reference, unfollow that person.
Yeah,
don't
no
listen
kidding.
to them.
Like,
don't listen. But yeah, my pure ref is just all my projects, just in one giant file. It's just
That's
a giant,
crazy.
you know. Pinterest is amazing, by the way.
How many gigs is that file, by the way?
Yeah, it takes like 30 minutes to load or go get coffee. No, but Pinterest is great because it leads you down rabbit holes, which is dangerous, so you gotta be careful. But, you know, you can click on one thing and it'll give you things that are very like-minded, and you'll find stuff that you're like, what is that? And that's awesome, you know? I found out what an atlatl was the other day, and it's this thing that, like, chucks spears faster, so it pierces harder, and I was like, I'm gonna use that to create a dragon hunter, because that's really cool, and that's what I did. So it's like, just keep finding, you'll find inspiration through real life if you just go live, which I think is another good advice. Don't just sit on your computer all day. Like, go live, go like do some stuff, and then bring all that information and world knowledge back. And that's what's going to make you as an artist valuable, because it's all about your experience in your world that makes you an artist.
Yeah, if you talk to artists like Terrell Whitlatch and Ian McCaig and others, I always hear them say, the other day I was taking a walk. I took a walk and I saw something, and that helped me get unstuck. So, yeah. Did somebody else have something they wanted to add to that question? Or should we take our next question?
I can add a little.
Absolutely.
Like, I think there are certain artists. Brian Froud comes to mind, where he's drawing and painting, and then creating books where he's writing stories for his drawing and paints, and he's creating things from imagination. I think that sort of reference can be super useful, because it's not like Pinterest is great, but you're just seeing the picture. Yeah. What I love about artists who do both, where they're illustrating their own stuff, you get into their minds a little bit, and you get to see like where that creativity is coming from, paired with the art that they're creating. I think that can be such a useful reference. I think Dinotopia might be another fantastic, if you're into creatures.
Because you love dinosaurs. You got all the dinosaurs.
But it's not just that you're seeing the dinosaurs, but you're also getting the story and the creative process, because creating these creatures, there's usually a story behind it as well. It's not just the visual aspect.
Greg Manches does that too with Above the Timberline, which is an amazing book too. It's all oil painted illustrations, but it also tells like this wonderful story, and there's polar bears in it, so why not love it? But like, yeah, I think finding inspiration in that is super important. There's a fine balance between like finding how other artists see the world and what they do to tell stories, and also looking at real world stuff. I think you need like a nice healthy balance of both to find something interesting.
Awesome, thank you. Next question.
Cool. Actually, y'all answered like 6 of the questions that came from the stream with that little tidbit. So
there's a hand over here. I saw you.
Actually, we got one
there's
over
a hand
here,
over
but
there.
I'm gonna head over there too. But before we do that, here's another question from stream that you didn't answer. If you could be a fictional character, who would you be?
Can I be Bruce from Jaws? I want to be the shark. Okay, that's my answer. I'm done.
Samwise Gamgee.
Nice.
I just want to be a hobbit.
Yeah.
That's my aspiration.
You want to be the true hero of a story? Yeah.
Xena, warrior princess. I want to kick butt and carry a chakram.
Hell yeah. I don't have one. Just pick anything. Just pick anything.
There's too many.
Based on some of your answers, I kind of feel like you would be like, I would like to design the character that I would be. Like, that's what I hear you. Like, you want to come up with new characters from scratch, or
I want to come up with new characters. Yeah.
Come on, you're an actor.
I didn't mean to take your answer from you.
Come up with one.
I don't know.
Think about it. We'll get back to you.
Suddenly you'll just yell something.
Yeah, just yell it out when you're done.
I just want to say thank you, the four of you coming out tonight, sharing a bit of your story, getting to the industry. So, since all four of you like work heavily with characters and creatures, and a lot of those drive our stories, on top of the art fundamentals that we have to learn, did you have to study like the art of storytelling, or did you have to develop that as you were working?
I feel like I'm sure this is the case for all of you guys, but for me, the north star of like my entire artistic process is narrative. Even when I'm working on an NPC, I'm making up a story about this guy. Where does he live? You know, does he have access to uh, like washing facilities? How grimy are his clothing? Where has he procured this from? Like, has he built it himself? Yeah, it's just like building it from the ground up in terms of thinking about that and imbuing that into your work constantly. Like, what kind of wear and tear would be occurring on his costume? You know, everything about him drives what he looks like. So
Yeah, I'm reading a book about screenplays, and one of the things that the author says, I think it's by Sid Mead. I don't remember his name. I said Sid Mead, that's an artist, so don't listen to me. But one of the things that he says is that story is action and action is character, right? So without the actions of a thing, without the story of something, you don't have character. There is no character because character is not what they say, but what they do, right? And so art is only just a medium to do that in. It's not really yes, you can doodle something and have it not really mean anything because it's just a doodle. But when it comes to being an artist and creating something for production or for yourself or whatever it is, we're constantly asking ourselves questions of where, how, who, why. Why is a huge motivator into what you're going to be drawing and how you're going to be drawing it or how you're going to be modeling it. So thinking through your character not as just like a visual form, but through actions of what they will or won't do or what they have done is super important. And I think that's something that we all probably think about. The same thing with creatures, you know.
Yeah, there's a class at Noman called Visual Structure, and I think it kind of directly addresses storytelling with character design. And the basis of it is you read a book and then you translate that into a different form of art. So I think like when I took it, I made a comic book based on a novel, and it kind of makes you see each character and problem solve them in different ways. So like one that's doing it in 2D and not 3D, but then you could think ahead and like, what if I took it a step further into 3D? But you fully analyze the structure of the story and write reports and everything on it and do full breakdowns. And I think even if you don't take that class, doing exercises that are similar to that, like just the concept of it, break down a novel, and then break down all the characters, and then design every character, and then try to translate that into a different medium.
I want to take that class.
It's really fun. You should take
It's a great
That
class.
sounds awesome.
Does Andrea still teach it? Because
I
she
think
was,
so.
she was the best.
She's the best teacher.
She's the best.
Storytelling, like in my opinion, it's the pinnacle of what, like, you might start off focusing more on the technical aspects of your craft. You know, how do I make a good looking head? How do I make hair? How do I make good looking clothes? But as you get deeper into it, and it really depends where you start. Some people are inherently like incredibly creative and they just think this way. But for me, like the pinnacle of a really good character is one that you can look at and you can feel the story without having, like, you don't know anything about that character. And that's like what Colleen was saying, like it can involve the wear and tear on that person, or on their clothing, on their equipment, like how their hair is styled.
Or why they're choosing that clothing.
Exactly. There's, you know, like maybe a character is like hit over here, so they have like a big scar. Their clothes are torn. Like that tells the story, and that's kind of like the pinnacle, I think, of what we do is being able to not just make a good-looking character, but a character that the story is like immediately visible and it speaks to the viewer. It should be like an immediate thing when it's done well.
there's a sense of life that should emanate from the character. They should look like they existed before you saw this image of them, and they'll exist long after you close the web browser. You know, like they need to look as though they have a soul within their body, essentially. Yeah. Does that answer the question? Hopefully.
I just want to go draw now. Listen to you guys. So
Perfect. Let's all go draw. Let's go do it.
Hi. I have a question about the industry itself, really. We've all kind of heard stories about being a woman in the industry, specifically gaming. And I was wondering if you guys could shine some light on like your experiences or things that you have overcome and how you went about these kind of challenges.
I have an answer.
Perfect.
I think a lot of, obviously this is going to be a broad statement and it does not apply to everyone. A lot of female artists seem to be more quiet and don't stand up for themselves. And I think, just be 10 times louder than you think you should be and just stand your ground when you think maybe you shouldn't, and just, I don't know, have more of a voice and be louder.
Yeah, and I
Yes.
think it's important to like surround yourself. I mean, look at here today, and when I started at Noman, I think I was two women were in my class. But when I talked to Adam about, the people at Noman, it's nearly 50-50 now, which is really cool. And also we're all look at that. Look at all of us up here, and it's so cool. So it's not that it's impossible to find, similarities in people that you can connect with, but like this is important. Which is why I think we're all here today doing it, is because we knew it was important to do. I'm considered like, oh, she's the girl that draws all the gross stuff, and I'm like, yeah, let's make that more normal. Let's make that more interesting. And like, I want to find similar artists like you guys. But that being said, I think it's just really important to, regardless of like being a woman in the industry, there can be challenges because yes, it's a newer industry for us, or we just weren't in it as often, or it wasn't as apparent. It's still just important to be a voice as an artist and have a unique voice, and people will come to you regardless. I think is really important, as well as just having confidence in your own work and having confidence in the people around you to support you in that, and not being in places that you don't get that support. Because if you do that, then those places will slowly die out, which is good. So
Yeah, apply to that job. Put your work on the internet. You're never gonna feel like you're ready, so just do it. There's what could possibly happen? Only good things. As the same thing goes for like networking. Reach out to that artist you admire, because the worst thing that can happen is that they don't reply, which I know firsthand that sucks. And hopefully they'll be kind when they respond to you. For the most part, I've found that artists are more than willing to share their insights. So just send that message. Obviously, you got to be humble. You got to be nice to talk to, and open. But yeah, ladies, just put yourself out there. Make that pitch. Speak your mind. Speak up. Yeah, you have to advocate for yourself, and that means for promotions. That means for raises, and that's scary sometimes. It's awkward sometimes, but these are skills that are not necessarily able to be taught in school. These are things that you have to learn to do on your own, and it takes time, it takes experience, but it's best to be confident and just put yourself forth.
And I think touching back on what I was talking about earlier about not letting other people kind of trample on your mindset. Now I'm at an amazing place, so I don't have to deal with stuff. But when I was earlier on in my career and working with very independent people, or people just starting out and they don't really know how to communicate always in the best way, and comments would come my way, not always the most tasteful comments, right? And I had to learn how to leave that as an external thing that had nothing to do with me and had more to do with that person. And never ever let anybody trample on your confidence or who you are. Never. That is sacred. Like, that's something that belongs to you, and it's so important to protect that and understand that what other people say, it's more about them. It has less to do with you, and from there, just keep shining. Show, like as Colleen said, show your work to the world. Let your work speak for itself, and let the other stuff just fall away.
Perfect.
I think it's also important to note that I think most studios are pretty positive environments, and we hear a lot about like worst case scenarios and bad experiences, but it's more than likely that most women will not have to deal with anything that's weird or, you know.
Yeah, honestly, my experience in the industry has been very positive. I've had three very different teams, but also equally as supportive. From the moment I came into each of these studios, I felt respected. I felt listened to. I felt like my leads had my back and my best interest at heart. And I know that that isn't everyone's experience. But at the same time, I was also the only woman on all of my teams until I recently came to Naughty Dog, where things are a little bit more split evenly, which is awesome to see. But it is possible to find teams that are going to be a welcoming and nurturing space. So it's not all bad.
Yeah, I was super, like, I was actually surprised, working at, like, getting the job at the big studio, just how welcoming and comfortable I felt in the environment. It was such a relief, honestly. And so don't be afraid. Like, it's totally fine out there. I subjected myself to some, like, working with people who were inexperienced in the beginning, and so I had some experiences. So that's a little on me, but it happens. That's life, and you just keep going.
And if those things do happen, stand up for yourself. Make the hard choice. If you have to remove yourself from a toxic environment, it's not going to be the end of your career.
No, and no one's going to judge you for that either. I think is really important. Because some people have positive experiences. We all have different experiences. I don't want to talk about everything, but I think it's really important to hit on that note is if something does happen, don't be siloed, because chances are is the one person that did something bad to you is usually the only really bad person in the studio. Everybody else would be like, what happened? And they'll get up and they'll support you and they'll fight for you. And all studios will. I haven't been to a studio that hasn't fought for me when something like that happens. And so just know that you're not alone in it. And again, if something happens, I'll just say out for it, like message me on Instagram and talk about it. It's fine. I'll talk to you about whatever it is that you want to talk about. And I think that's the point, is you don't deal with it alone. Have people that are willing to help you and support you through it if something does happen. So
I'm just listening. This is good.
good call.
We got another question?
Yeah, we do. So, what should be included in a character artist's portfolio? You have balance of digital and traditional pieces. I guess it's just a general, like, well, what should you put in your portfolio type question.
Finished characters.
Yeah,
Finished game characters.
Yeah, that's really important. Finished work is super important for sure. You need to know that they know the whole pipeline. You can say that you do, but if you don't have it in your portfolio, there's just no proof that you can do it.
Yeah.
So
and make sure it's in either real time or cinematic, like whatever you're aiming for. If you are applying to a game studio, put a real time character in there, because it doesn't really help a game studio to see offline rendered stuff. Obviously, seeing sculpting skill matters, but we need to know do you understand the game art pipeline more than anything?
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be one for one. Like, for example, I got hired in my current studio because I did Sideshow Collectible Aliens, which is sculpting, but I also had game work in my portfolio where they're like, okay, she knows the game pipeline, but I'm getting hired because I had a certain skill set, for sculpting creatures. But yeah, it's just really important to, and I think a lot of it too is kind of what we talked about before, where don't put up stuff in your portfolio that you don't want to work on. If you aren't into doing cinematics, like she loves cinematics, I don't want to touch them. So I don't have it in my portfolio. I have stylized stuff and I have game work because I like the game pipeline. You don't work this hard, you don't take this big risk of becoming an artist in the industry to end up doing something that you don't want to do. It doesn't really make any sense. So my biggest thing is like, post what you want to do. If people are like, oh, rigging, we've said it before, is rigging's, yeah, people need riggers. We love riggers. But if you don't like rigging, don't do it. There's no point in doing that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for saying that, because it's like, I feel like so many people think that they need to be able to do everything, and it's just like, just do character art if that's what you want to do.
Yeah.
If you want to do rigging, go for it.
Because if you love what you do, you're going to be super valuable to the studio that you go to, because you'll love to work. You'll love to do it. I love to sculpt Xenos. I love to make characters. That's why there's no environments in my portfolio.
Thank you.
So that's super, super important. A lot of, I think, students probably get confused as to like what kind of range that you need. And I think it's important to have a range of like, I can do realistic stuff, I can do stylized stuff, and sometimes you'll get picked up because you can do both. Sometimes you'll get picked up because you just are really good at realism, or you'll get picked up because you're really good at stylized. But ultimately, we all in our portfolios, I don't probably think have like a barrel or a crate or an environment or anything like that.
You'll never catch a barrel
leave that
in
to
my
the environment
portfolio.
artists. Like that's what they like doing the environments. They like making leaves and stuff. Like we don't want to do that. We want to do the other stuff.
We are very grateful.
We're
for
super
the
grateful that
who
people
love
want to do that. Yes. And we need environments to put our characters in, but like we need characters. We do characters. So yeah, I think that's super important.
What would you guys, dovetailing with it, what would you say to someone, because I know there's people out there that might feel like, well, yeah, but there's probably so few jobs to go around for what I want to do, so maybe I do need to settle for learning a skill that will get me paid, to kind of, and I know we've talked about this, Ashley, so I'm kind of asking a leading question, but to be sort of the contrarian to that remark, what would you say to the mindset of, yeah, but there's not enough jobs to go around, do I need to find something that maybe isn't my favorite just so I can get paid to do it?
I mean, I saw Amy shake her head too, but
it's a little bit of a trick question. I think you know where I'm going with this.
I mean, maybe I don't. I feel like we've probably talked about that, but you know how I talk. I think the biggest thing with that is there are jobs. Like there's not jobs. It feels like that. It'll feel like there's not a place for you. It'll feel, see, I got you, man. So I think that's the biggest thing, is that it looks like the competition's hot and ready, and like it looks like there's tons of people out there that you're competing with, which is kind of true. I talk about this a lot, where I think you'd be really surprised that people that want to pursue this, if you put even like 20% of your effort, like I'm talking about true effort, into character work or into what you want to do, you will be far above most people that are trying to pursue this work. A lot of people want to do it, but actually don't put in the work, and it does take a lot of work. It's fun, but it takes tons of work. So I think you'll be very surprised that the pool that you're fighting with is actually really small. For example, I met her at Lightbox because she did the talk, and then I found out as we were talking in the back that we have like multiple friends that we know that are from the same industry. This industry is super, super small. So don't lose hope on feeling like, oh, there's no jobs out there. There are jobs. You're good. Rest assured.
Just be really freaking good at what you like to do.
Yeah.
And then they can't not hire you.
Exactly.
I know that seems like super easy, but it's like this field takes just grit. Even if you are super passionate about it, it's going to test that love constantly, especially when you're at your lowest point. Like, it's going to test those things, and if you love it, you have to push through, and you'll be a better artist for it at the end.
Yeah, I think there's a fun story with that, and I might be quoting it kind of wrong, but there's a really famous author who comes, I don't know if it's Stephen King, I can't remember, it might be, but somebody comes up to him and goes, oh, I really want to write, I really want to do these things, and he goes up to him and he goes, well, so he's like, don't, it's too hard, it's too this, don't do it. And the dude walked away, and he was like, why would you say that to that person? He's like, because if that person really wants it, they won't listen to my advice. They'll continue writing, they'll continue pursuing it. And that's the mentality that you need, is no matter what people say of like, that's too hard, or that's too that, or you're not good enough. If you're really passionate about this industry, you're just going to ignore all that and just continue doing it anyway, and you'll get there. So
I would imagine that every single person sitting here has had a moment or many moments where they're just like, why am I doing this to myself?
yeah.
Like, I don't know if I can do this.
Yeah.
And you just have to push through those moments.
It takes a lot of sacrifice, more than I think most people think. Like, yes, it's something that we love to do, but we choose to do this over a lot of other things that we could be doing, because we're really passionate about it more than anything else, But the fact that we get paid to do it's great, but a paycheck is not my motivator for being in this industry at all. If that was, I wouldn't be an artist. You can make way more money doing something else or something better or something easier or whatever it is. But that's not why we're all here. We want to make art, and we want to have a cool voice, and we want to be a part of cool visual teams that also make really cool shit.
Yeah.
So, sorry.
Do you two want to have a word in edgewise on this? Sorry, we're like dominating.
I'm going in two different directions. There are some people who are in difficult life circumstances and they have skill in 3D, but they need a job now. You may have to do something. I mean, it might happen, but I would say if that ends up happening, please do not stop working on your portfolio for the thing that you really freaking love, and do not freaking give up on it, even if you have to do like I like to make characters, so ideally, like, I don't want to do environments or props, right? So if you were in, like me, in that position, maybe you're making props, set time aside on the weekend, set time aside after your workday, keep working at the character thing, and just do not stop, because you have to be realistic. Like, you can't sit there for an extended period of time and not earn income. For a lot of people, for some that might be possible, but for most it's not a possibility. But don't stop is one thing. And then for me, when I was going through, because with my story, right, like there was a lot of indecision and there was a lot of confusion, but I knew I wanted to do characters and I wasn't going to settle for less. And I was like, I don't care if people are telling me I can't do it, because I had people telling me that I can't do it, and I had people doubting me, and I was like, quite frankly, I just don't give a damn like what you have to say to me. I'm going to keep going because I know I can do it. Forget you guys. I don't care. I just did it.
Yeah. And we all have that, but also I just wanted to point out that man right there also is living proof that, like, just don't stop and just keep doing it and you'll make it. And you can talk to him about it later, and it's fucking awesome. But like, yeah, it's really true.
Very kind, Ashley. You guys are the guests, though. But yeah.
I'm just saying, you are a really good example of that, though. So it happens everywhere, and it happens all the time that, people will work jobs to get close and make connections. For example, I believe David Coleman, he started as a janitor or a mailroom dude in DreamWorks, and yes, he would just keep doodling, and he would post them up on the thing, and then one day someone came by and was like, who did that? And he was like, I did that. And he's like, you did that? Like, yeah. And so then they were like, we should do storyboarding. And then now he's a storyboarder, and he's done all sorts of stuff for Netflix, DreamWorks, Disney. Like, the guy's prolific in storyboarding and art directing and stuff. And he started in the mailroom. So yes, maybe you can't get the job that you want, but there are ways to get to there and look for the opportunity to get there if you're really creative about how you go about that. So I think there's avenues that you can take that are kind of weird, but they're never wrong. Everybody's journey to get into this industry is different, so.
Awesome. More questions?
Oh, hi. Thank you guys for coming. I'm not from Noman, but I actually go to a school a few blocks over, so it's really nice to have this event here. I appreciate it. Sorry, my main question was, I'm also a character artist in the works, and something I've noticed as a more stylized artist is like in the industry, how do you like pop out? Because since character artists, there's so many within a company, and they're all doing like the same style. So, what makes you more like important to them? Like, how do you pop out to be considered to a company? I guess.
For me, I would say the best stylized artists are the ones that know realism, especially anatomy. And I look for that in any stylized artist portfolio. Um, and it also, I think a good example is, I'm going to say League of Legends, because that has a very specific style in game. But you'll notice that depending on if it's a product or, let's say, the mobile version of it, that style changes very slightly. And all of those are based on realistic anatomy and how you choose to deform it and simplifying it in different ways. So, to show that you understand the subtleties of different types of stylized work and anatomy at the same time, that's what's most important. Also, basic things like color palette and overall shape language, knowing when to oversimplify and when to add a lot of detail, but not I don't gravitate towards the portfolios where they do one style repeatedly and then they only do that style, because that ends up just being one single strength that's done very well. So you need to show versatility.
The style's a really complicated word in the sense of like the industry, because you can have your style, but understanding how to match style, I think, is another thing that's really important. So, you know, understanding how to match style is usually the thing that we all are pretty probably good at doing now, because you're entering into a studio that's either halfway through making a game or is starting a game, and you need to create a style and find a style, and all stuff like that. So I think, it's kind of just reiterating what she said, where it's really understanding the form and fundamentals of what it is you're doing, and then breaking down how they're breaking that apart. And it's really about asking like simple questions like, is this scary? Is it cartoony? Is it this? Is it that? How detailed is it? How super simplified? Is it Love, Death, and Robots yogurt dude, or is it Love, Death, and Robots like giant awesome alien thing?
That's
and I'm
a good example.
It is, right?
Because they're all stylized,
Yeah.
and we would have to jump between like creepy stylized alien thing versus something really cartoony.
Yeah, like the
cutesy.
yogurt thing. Yeah, and kidsy. And so I think, again, with the portfolio and asking the question about stylized, and what she honed on to was, if you just see the person can only do one style, that means that I'm a little worried about if you can match a style that our game is, right? Like, yes, you can do that one thing really well, but can you understand others? And I think that's where having a portfolio that's realism to stylize, people go, oh, okay, you understand how to push things in directions when they need to be pushed in that direction, And I think that's the more powerful thing in a portfolio.
I think that just indicates strong fundamentals overall. Like you guys just said, that's the cornerstone.
Yeah. Stylize is all about how you break what you already know.
Yeah.
So if you don't know it, you can tell that that's where stylize looks really weird.
Yep.
Yeah.
Cool. I think we probably have time for about one, maybe two more questions.
Let's do two. We'll do one from the stream and we'll do one from the audience. Our last one will be right here. So, have you ever had to push back on some work that you generated in a studio? And could you explain how that went?
Pushback. I'm assuming, I think the biggest thing that we all kind of know, and we've reiterated on this too, is kill your darlings. So because it's about hitting a vision sometimes you might create something that you think is really cool, but if the game changes direction and they go, hey, we don't really need that thing anymore, we're just going to cut it, or we need to change it a lot because the gameplay is different or because of X, Y, and Z, you really can't take that personally. Because like you said, it's all about empathy for the team forward. And as a team, you're making a conscious decision together to say, hey, this thing isn't working, this thing isn't going to make our game great, so we need to do something else to make our game great. And you can't take that personally. It doesn't, again, it doesn't mean you're a bad artist. It's just, it takes a team to match the vision, like all the big projects that we've worked on, and it doesn't happen just to you, it happens to everybody. So
I think the only time that I would ever push back would be if someone asks for something that I know is going to cost the company a ton of money and time and seemed almost irrational. Very rare cases, but I have brought that up once, like in a polite way, of course. And if those people don't consider it, like sometimes they do and then they agree because they won't realize like the full cost of like what a change might take or something. You bring it up once and then you just drop it because they have the information and that's it.
I think you can bring these concerns to a lead as well. And any good lead is going to be constantly fighting for you and fighting for the health of the team and the team's best interests. So these kinds of concerns are definitely something that should be discussed with them. You don't really want to be calling these shots, depending on the role. But like in my experience, you don't want to necessarily be calling these shots yourself. But if you have a concern, instead of like complaining about it to someone in private, it's probably best to discuss those things with your lead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I just go straight to my lead, and he's a great guy. He's an angel for putting up with me because I can be a massive, like, I don't want to say push backer, but I will definitely point out stuff that I think like perhaps needs improvement or that I'm not feeling. And that relationship that you have is so important. He what I like about my lead is super nice in terms of like he will listen to you and he will take it into account. But if he knows that we either like can't do it or it doesn't fit in line with the vision, he very diplomatically is able to just tell me, let's just focus on what like what the feedback wants us to do. Let's not push into that territory. But then there have been times where, like, even just recently, there were a couple things I was working on and I proposed some changes and he was like, oh, we can totally do this, I'm digging this, I like these changes. And so you may find times that it's totally possible to push back a little bit, but do it in, like, if you are going to do that, do it in a polite way, do it in a kind way, talk to your lead, have a great relationship with your lead, and go from there. And I think you'll find the balance. Again, work is a very human experience. You're dealing with humans. These people are not machines. They have feelings, they have empathy, they have sympathy. They will understand where you're coming from. And if they know that you want what's best for this piece or for the production, they will also understand that. They'll also feel as well, because they're human beings too. They'll know if you're coming from a selfish place. They'll know, and they're going to be like, sorry. So.
Yeah, I think you hit on a good point too, just to say that, it's not that you can't give pushback, but you should get pushback with a reason, because they hired you for a reason, which means you have an expertise that is welcome to the team. So if you have a reason for wanting to give pushback, it's probably a pretty good reason if you're approaching it from a professional standpoint, which people are always going to be willing to hear. I very rarely have been like, hey, I think this xenomorph design needs to be this, and here are all my reasons as to why, for gameplay, for this, and for that. And if I'm thinking about the vision properly, they'd be like, oh yeah, we'll totally do that. But if I'm just like, I want this cool one that looks like it, whatever, they're like, that doesn't make any, that's just you, Ashley. And I'm like, oh yeah, sorry. And you get caught up in being an artist. But yeah, I just think it's important to approach it from an expert level, which that just comes with practice and time of being in the industry.
You have to keep in mind that, like, the things that you are proposing have man hours involved. Just like we talked about earlier, you're a small piece of a much larger organism. you have to consider that any choice that you make in terms of pushing back on things or pitching things will have a downstream effect.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Okay. Hi. As a young female artist in the making, it's just, again, really inspiring to see this lineup of 4 women on the stage. So thank you again for doing this. I am primarily a 2D artist. I am a 3D artist in the making at Nomen. And I just want to know, you guys touched on the importance of like 2D fundamentals and how the technical stuff is kind of stuff you can learn and the creative stuff is stuff that takes a lot longer to be taught and developed. So like, what in the process of designing a character would you say is an opportunity for, I can sketch out a skeleton of this character and do the 3D flesh on top, or is it vice versa? Like,
Yeah, so 2D and 3D definitely go very harmoniously together. I got hired at my current industry or at my current job because they're like, you can also draw. And sometimes that can be really important because sometimes blocking something out in 3D can take longer to give an idea. So if your lead or your art director can understand what you want to do with just like a quick sketch or something, that goes a really long way because, it doesn't waste any man hours where, we're creating all this thing like, hey, what do you think about this? And I just show it as an idea. That can be super powerful because at the end of the day, when it comes to doing 3D, when I sculpt out my characters or creature design, I'm always in ZBrush. They have the new little, silhouette. Well, I say new, it's not that new, I guess, but the little silhouette box. I love that silhouette box because it's just black and white and it just shows silhouette. And it's super important in the beginning to only focus on like those fundamental shapes. I treat those shapes as if I'm drawing them, from every single angle. And so it all kind of comes back. I usually can tell, usually, it's not always the case, but when we look at portfolios for characters, I can usually tell if you can draw or if you can't draw. And it just comes down to the basis of, do you practice fundamentals? You can practice fundamentals in 3D. I just feel like a lot of people who start in 3D kind of jump over that because it's so easy to get so technical in ZBrush so quickly that we look at all the buttons and we don't focus on like what actually matters. But 2D is just pen and paper, and you're just focusing on like the initial vision, the initial concept and design, and that doesn't go away with 3D. So, I mean, if you're at Nomen as well, like you're on a pretty good path to be able to do both, but yeah, it comes hand in hand all the time.
There's one position that I had at one point. This isn't the same as like drawing concept and then doing 3D. This was a 3D character position that required you to be able to paint correctly. And it's a very niche thing. And I think, I don't know how Fortiche or Arcane is done exactly, but it's a very similar style to that. And it was for League of Legends Cinematic, and I'm not a good painter. I paint, but I'm not good. But I knew the 3D side of it, and it is very like oversimplification of modeling and sculpting, and then you go in on top and you only paint just your diffuse pass, basically like just your colors, and you're painting your light in there as well. And you need to be like a master of color theory, basically. And your shots aren't going to have lights in them. There's going to be nothing like that. Everything is going to be just flat as it is. And there does seem to be a bit of a shortage of this specialty. If you can have that in your portfolio, those jobs come up quite frequently, and it is a huge skill set to have to be able to do both of those. And the artists that I've known who are like amazing at that, they tend to come from the 2D side rather than the 3D side.
Yeah, just to add to that, it definitely feels like as 3D has become more and more technical, there does seem to be from my perspective, a lack of people who have that painting proficiency that know how to paint. So that's definitely beneficial to have in your portfolio. And then another thing I wanted to add is like just the act. For me, the act of sketching is so beneficial for adding shapes into your visual library rapidly. Like there are some artists who are amazing speed sculptors. They can do like this awesome thing in like 1 hour. I'm not there yet. I'm not one of those people. And so for me, what I've found, because I can bust out a sketch in like 20 minutes. So in an hour, I can do like a solid like 3 or 4 sketches. And that's incredibly beneficial to getting shapes into your mind, especially like with the type of work that we're doing. Fantasy, like you need to have lots of different shapes because we're not just making people, we're also making like crazy creatures and crazy armor designs, and having that shape library is so critical, and you can really rapidly iterate through sketching. Then the balance comes into place, like how much sketching is enough, because you do need to be sculpting and doing your 3D as well. So how do I balance like a little bit of drawing with a little bit of my 3D? You don't want to lose proficiency in 3D and go all out on the 2D, because that's not super great position to be in either. But I do think it's a great supplement for sure. Or if you get stuck on something, you can try sketching it out at different angles. That might help unblock you as well.
Yeah, or you can basically become your own concept artist as a 3D artist. You can bust out some early renders of your work and then toss it into Photoshop, and then do some paint overs, do some photo bashing. You can, grab the liquefy tool and just mush things around and see what works in terms of silhouettes. I find that so many times tossing something into Photoshop is going to be so much more rapid than like trying to fiddle around in 3D and like figure something out. That way as well, it's like so much more non-destructive, where you're working on top of a render rather than working on the model itself. And then, if you move forward with those changes, you're like, I don't really like that. It's like, instead of spending a half hour doing that in 3D, you could just move the proportions around on the face in Photoshop, and you're like, okay, this looks way better. And then you use that as a target for yourself. So I find that to be super valuable.
Yeah, you jump back and forth a lot, and it's so funny because I was literally like, liquefy it, do the things, because that's what it is like you'll start in 3D, but then you go, okay, how can I push this even farther? And it's really easy to go into 2D and be able to just like pull those shapes out and see what works and what doesn't. And it doesn't take very long, in comparison to 3D. But at the same time, on the flip side of that, if I'm drawing something and I'm like, man, I can't get this face angle right, or this perspective feels off, I can also go into 3D and be like, I'm going to pose like a thing real quick and take a snapshot of that. And then I'm going to draw on top of that. And that is not cheating. That's learning. That's huge. I had on art Discord that I was a part of, they were like, man, I can't figure out this box thing. And I was like, I taught you Blender. You have a cube. You have a camera that sits in the same machine. Go use it. And he did. And he was like, oh, and he like figured it out. And he understood like why his perspective was looking weird and whatever. So it's not about tracing, it's about understanding. And I think that's the really important part of it, that I think when most 2D artists who look at 3D as a cheat or something like that, they think that you're just tracing, which some people do, but it's really important that you shouldn't be doing that. You should be learning and absorbing and understanding and using one tool to empower the other, and then vice versa. And that's just going to help you be an all-around better character artist or creature artist or whatever it is that you want to do.
Well, we could fire up the fire pit and break out some drinks and talk for another 5 hours, but
True.
I want to thank you guys so much for taking the time to be here. Amanda, Colleen, Amy, Ashley, this has been really inspiring. I've certainly learned a lot just listening to you guys. Can't wait to go make some art after this. I hope you guys have had a similar experience. So thank you for those of you who have been here at the stage. Thank you to all of our viewers online. And we welcome you back to our next event. And if you want to know what that is, it's probably posted on social media or on the event page on our website, or it'll be forthcoming very soon. So thank you, everyone. And we'll see you again soon. Good night.
Yay! Nice. Woo!